Welcome to this incredibly deep dive study based on the dense and honestly almost overwhelming research of Matthew James Bannier from the Porchlight YouTube channel. Now, I want to mention right up front, we are talking about hundreds of hours of painstaking scriptural cross-referencing, intense mathematical calculation, and deep geographic mapping, all meticulously compiled into one massive theory. If you want to explore his full, multi-hour presentation for yourself, and I highly recommend checking out his original work, you'll find a link to that source material right down in the description below. Today, we are exploring a highly intricate, multi-layered prophetic puzzle that boldly aims to connect ancient scripture with modern geographic topography and even massive sci-fi-level astronomical events. It is a lot to take in, but we're going to break it all down step by step. So we are officially putting on our biblical researcher hats today to impartially map out this fascinating theory. The central, burning question posed by Banner's study is whether a highly specific roadmap to the end times has actually been hidden in plain sight this whole time. And when we say roadmap, we aren't just talking about interpreting some vague poetic verses that could mean 100 different things. No, we are investigating whether a literal, mathematical code was purposefully and deeply encoded beneath the English translation of the King James Bible. Over the course of this study, we are going to look really closely at how this theory pieces together a giant, complex mosaic. It's a mosaic that spans celestial constellations up in the night sky, earthly geography right under our feet, and a remarkably specific set of numbers meticulously woven into the ancient text. It's like a giant cosmic puzzle.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the gates of hell. We're going to look at the anchor text and the geographic vision behind all of this.
Our study begins with an anchor text that establishes both a physical location and a core prophecy about the church. Spoken by Jesus at ancient Caesarea Philippi, Matthew 16:18 says, "And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Now, to understand this as a researcher, we really have to look at the history of that specific real-world location. Caesarea Philippi wasn't just a random spot. It was built right against a massive, imposing rock edifice. And this rock contained a physical cave that the ancients literally referred to as the gates of hell, a dark, cavernous site deeply dedicated to the pagan worship of the god Pan. This verse, spoken in the shadow of that rock, forms the absolute bedrock of Bannier's multi-layered theory. In its original context, sure, it's a powerful statement about the resilience of the church against ultimate evil, but the study argues something deeper. It argues that the Creator often declares the end from the very beginning. Therefore, this very first mention of the word church in all of Scripture isn't just an introduction, it is actually concealing a highly specific, encoded roadmap for its ultimate departure at the end of the age.
So, taking that idea of the physical location, the theory posits a modern physical inverse to the ancient ruins of Caesarea Philippi. And where is it? Hell's Gate State Park in Idaho, USA. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth are we looking at Idaho? Well, Bannier's research centers on a profound, almost surreal realization that began there on a very specific date in June 2022. While visiting Hell's Gate State Park, he observed a massive sturgeon, just a single, incredibly large fish, inexplicably stuck in the shallow currents of the Snake River. And it was stuck right in the shadow of a geographic rock formation that visually mirrors the ancient one over in Israel. This peculiar event, a fish seeming completely unable to move forward despite the rushing, powerful waters around it, sparked this entire puzzle. To the researcher's mind, this physical anomaly was highly symbolic. It represented a literal delay in a prophetic timeline. It was an earthly, physical echo of a massive cosmic pause that we are going to break down shortly.
Moving right along to Section 2, decoding the book. Here, we're diving into the numerology within the King James Version.
To really understand exactly how a random geographic anomaly at Hell's Gate State Park in Idaho connects back to ancient scripture, we have to plunge into the deep end of rigorous, highly structured biblical numerology. It is absolutely crucial to note here that this study relies strictly on the 1611 King James Version of the Bible. It treats this specific English translation and its exact structural layout as the mathematically encoded Book of the Lord. When we cross-reference the text and carefully, painstakingly count the phrasing, separated precisely by the exact punctuation marks established by those original 17th century translators, a mind-bending pattern emerges. The phrase gates of hell in Matthew 16:18 happens to be exactly the 22nd phrase in that verse. According to the study's incredibly strict methodology, this is no coincidence. Not at all. It serves as a shorthand numerical hint for the year 2022. Remember, that's the very year the researcher was standing there, observing that stuck fish in Idaho. The research proposes that this 22nd placement acts as a sort of divine breadcrumb, urging the careful, observant reader to look much, much closer at the year 2022 for a major prophetic status update. Zooming out from the granular verse-by-verse level to the grand architectural layout of the entire New Testament, we find another massive mathematical synchronization. Matthew 16:18 happens to be precisely the 546th verse in the New Testament. I mean, just stop and think about the sheer mathematical improbability of that for a second. We are talking about a text compiled by numerous authors, spread over several centuries, translated and standardized over millennia. Yet this specific verse, with its specific themes, lands on the exact 546th position. This functions as the next major puzzle piece in our study. The research argues that the overarching architecture of the book itself, right down to the exact immutable verse counts, is intentionally designed from the very beginning of time to convey hidden chronological information to those who are paying close investigative attention.
So what is the significance of the number 546? To unpack that, we turn to the Strong's Concordance. For those who might be unfamiliar, Strong's Concordance is a foundational, highly trusted reference tool used by biblical researchers all over the world. It's an exhaustive index of every single original Hebrew and Greek root word found in the Bible, and each word is assigned a specific, unique reference number. Well, the entry for H2022 is the Hebrew word har, which directly translates to mountain. In biblical prophecy, mountains consistently represent great kingdoms, sprawling empires, or pivotal, towering years in human history. Here is the kicker. In the entirety of the King James Bible, this specific Hebrew word, har, translated into English, appears exactly 546 times. Let that sink in. The 546th verse of the New Testament is mathematically locked directly back into the year 2022 through the Strong's index number for the word mountain. The study views this incredibly complex web of numerology as absolute, undeniable proof of a divine mathematical design.
And it doesn't stop there. When we break down the mathematics of 546 even further, the connections just multiply. 546 is the product of 13 times 42. It's the deep factorization of that verse number. The study argues that 42 is a clever, simple shorthand for the year 2022. Why? Because 20 plus 22 equals exactly 42. Furthermore, the number 13 in biblical theology has long been heavily associated with the concept of rebellion, the adversary, and specifically, the serpent from the Garden of Eden. And, true to form, the actual plural word serpents appears exactly 13 times in the biblical text. This numeric signature points directly back to the overarching theme of the snake. And that, of course, ties perfectly to the geographical anchor of this entire theory, the Snake River in Idaho. It seamlessly maps the ancient textual timeline directly onto modern American geography. Now, you might be thinking, it's one thing to find intricate numerical codes buried deep within the pages of an ancient book. People find patterns in numbers all the time, right? But this study suggests something even more expansive and, honestly, awe-inspiring. It proposes that the creator didn't just encode this timeline in the text, but literally carved it directly into the dirt, the water, and the physical geography of the earth itself.
This brings us to Section 3, As Above, So Below. Let's look at earthly geography as a divine status update.
This brings us to a fascinating, massive concept heavily utilized in the research, the principle of as above, so below. The study argues that the heavenly constellations, which many ancient researchers actually believe originally told the story of the gospel in the night sky, are perfectly mirrored by earthly bodies of water and physical land masses. By looking really closely at the geographic topography of North America, the study notes some staggering parallels. For example, the physical winding shape of the Snake River in Idaho remarkably mirrors the stars of the Serpents constellation. Moving across the map to the east, if you take the Great Lakes and turn them upside down, their distinct interconnected shapes allegedly mirror the heavenly fish constellations, which represent the biblical tribes of Ephraim and Judah. Going further south, the shallow sea shelf running along the coast of Florida and extending deep into the Caribbean Sea perfectly outlines the celestial constellation of Hercules, the hero, captured right in the act of crushing Draco, the cosmic dragon. According to the research, God is using the physical layout of the earth itself as a massive, interactive, geographic prophetic board. But here is where the biblical researcher persona really has to look closely, because the maps don't line up flawlessly.
To explain why the earthly geography isn't a 100% perfect match to the stars above, Bannier uses a brilliant spot the difference analogy. Think of those old puzzle games you played as a kid. He theorizes that while the ancient constellations show God's original, intended divine plan, these slight topographical differences found in modern earthly geography reveal a divine status update. For instance, look at the serpent. In the night sky, the celestial serpent's tail points straight up into the heavens, but its earthly counterpart, the Snake River, takes a sharp, unnatural bend right at Lewiston, Idaho, which happens to be exactly at Hell's Gate State Park. The study claims this physical river bend is not just random geology. No, it signals a literal alteration, or a bend, in the prophetic timeline. It represents a divergence from the heavenly plan, indicating that the prophetic timeline on Earth took a sudden, hard detour.
That brings us to Section 4, the altered timeline, where we'll unpack the 2022 reset and the mystery of the seven thunders. That geographic status update, that bend in the river, brings us to the most complex and, honestly, mind-bending part of our entire puzzle. A shifting prophetic timeline where chaotic human events have actually caused adjustments to the cosmic clock. Let's unpack each of these dates on the timeline carefully, because it's absolutely crucial to the study. The research suggests that the year 2020 triggered what is called premature threshing. This directly references the massive global pestilence and the unprecedented earthly shutdowns we all live through. Because of this massive global disruption, the original prophetic star date that was allegedly slated for 2021 had to be delayed in order to balance the scales of cosmic time. This premature event caused God to effectively pause or reset the astronomical clock in 2022, introducing a vital, desperately needed period of grace or delay. Just like that stuck fish in the river, time was forced to hold its position. This delay creates a mathematical ripple effect all the way down the line, creating what the study defines as a 2025 echo, where past prophetic warnings repeat themselves, ultimately pushing the timeline's final convergence further down the road to the year 2028.
To support this really bold concept of a divine mathematical delay, the study points us directly to Psalms chapter 119, verse 147. In the exact phrasing of the King James translation, the verse reads, "I prevented the dawning of the morning and cried, I hoped in thy word." The phrase we are looking at begins with the word morning. Now, when you painstakingly count every single word in that incredibly massive chapter, starting from the very beginning, the word morning happens to be exactly the 2022nd word. Actually, let's pause for a second and just think about the sheer math there. The 2022nd word is part of a verse about preventing the dawn. The researcher interprets this text quite literally and mathematically. God actively prevented the end times, the dawning of the morning, from initiating in the specific year of 2022. It was a divinely mandated pause. This profound delay is attributed to something the study identifies as the mysterious seven thunders. If we look at Revelation chapter 10, the Apostle John hears the voices of seven thunders, but he is explicitly commanded by heaven to seal up what they said and write them not. It's one of the great mysteries of the text. Bannier describes these hidden thunders as an astronomical time reset mechanism. It's almost like a sci-fi level cosmic event where the very hands of time were literally rolled back. Because the message of the thunders was sealed and completely hidden from human knowledge, it represents a hidden behind-the-scenes adjustment to the prophetic clock. This rollback is the exact mechanism that causes subsequent years to repeat or echo in the timeline. It perfectly explains, according to the researcher, why certain expected apocalyptic events simply didn't happen on schedule. It ultimately gives humanity a longer, unmerited window of grace before the ultimate convergence hits.
And finally, Section 5, the 2028 convergence, the ultimate prophetic destination that this entire map is pointing toward.
With all of these delays, the astronomical resets, and the earthly echoes painstakingly accounted for, the entire mathematical and geographic mosaic synthesized in this study points to a single, unmovable convergence year. The study claims the year 2028 is overwhelmingly encoded from the very first to the very last pages of Scripture. For example, looking at the original Hebrew text of Genesis 1:1, we can examine the yods. A yod is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, but in biblical numerology, it often functions as a crucial mathematical marker for time. In the very first verse of the entire Bible, these yods sit exactly at letter positions 20 and 28. Then, we cross-reference the famous fig tree prophecy, which states that the generation that sees Israel become a nation will not pass away before all things are fulfilled. Israel was founded in 1948. If a full biblical generation is mathematically defined as exactly 80 years, and you add 80 to 1948, the math lands squarely and undeniably on the year 2028. But this next piece of the puzzle is what really drives the point home. Notice the exact numbering of the final verse in the Gospel of Matthew. The study points out that the very last verse of the book is chapter 28, verse 20. That is literally the year 2028 written in reverse. And what is the actual text of that perfectly numbered verse? It explicitly pairs with the phrase, end of the world. For the researcher, this is an absolutely undeniable, mathematically perfect signature left by the divine author. It finalized the entire book of Matthew by stamping it with the exact year of the end.
But the research goes even further than just landing on a broad general year. Through incredibly complex calculations of the various overlapping timelines, the study predicts a highly specific final convergence date. This is done by factoring in 227 specific milestones mentioned throughout all of Scripture. These aren't random numbers. These include overlapping numerical cycles, ancient agricultural feast days, and precise chronological markers hidden from the book of Genesis all the way through to Revelation. By utilizing the exact word counts, the verse positioning, and the modern geographic coordinates we've investigated today, the study mathematically narrows the massive timeline down to culminate on one precise day, November 16, 2028.
Now, the link to Banner's full, extensive study is down in the description below, and I highly encourage you to look at the primary source material yourself. After diving into all these layers, we really have to ask ourselves, is it possible that the massive physical architecture of our planet and the precise numbering of ancient texts were perfectly synchronized from the dawn of time to point to one specific day? Or is the human mind simply so incredibly resilient and so desperate to find order in the chaotic noise of the end times that it will construct meaning out of coincidence? I'll let the evidence be your guide. What do you think?